Let's see what the role of practice in grammar teaching is. Practice is a necessity to be successful in any field. And even though no one questions the importance of practice in learning, it is sometimes unclear what kind of practice is necessary for developing specific knowledge or building various skills. So let's first try to discover how practice supports learning by looking at fields other than language learning and teaching. You will now look at two short videos demonstrating the role of practice in cooking and music. While viewing, try to think about these issues. It is often said that practice makes perfect. What do the videos imply about the role of practice? How does it support the learning process? In other words, what does practice perfect? And what kind of practice is effective? In other words, what makes practice perfect? Let's put it all together somehow. Practice perfects accuracy and fluency in the learning process and helps to reinforce the connections between the theoretical knowledge and practical use of a learning subject. Practice is extremely important for honing different skills. It should be guided, meaningful, structured, and organized both in content and time. To be effective, Practice has to be planned carefully and conducted meaningfully, that is, it has to be focused on the specific language item which we want our students to comprehend. It should be productive and engaging to be beneficial for learning. It also has to be implemented in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm the students in quantity, both in the time spent on practice as well as the number of exercises, and therefore cause a lack of motivation. How does grammar practice help students? According to Scott Thornbury, grammar practice helps students improve their accuracy, use correct grammar, improve their fluency, speak and write without pauses and get their meaning across, and reorganize their knowledge, integrate new knowledge into old, that is, engage in restructuring. Let's have a look at various grammar practice activities, which can generally be divided into three groups: controlled practice activities, guided practice activities, and free practice activities. Controlled activities give students repeated practice in accuracy and the form of a grammar item and allow them to make a few mistakes. In guided practice activities, teachers want students to think about and use specific language item or items accurately as often as possible. In order to complete these activities, students have to use the target grammar structure, but they also have the freedom to somewhat personalize the language and contribute their own ideas. This maintains students' interest, but also challenges them. During free practice activities, students have complete freedom in the language they produce. The teacher can't predict what will be said before the activity begins. Students have the greatest opportunity to personalize the language, experiment, and incorporate previously learned grammar and other language points. Controlled practice activities typically include repetition. Students are asked to repeat what the teacher has said or what they have heard, and drills. Students repeat structural patterns through oral practice. At first, it probably seems like these kinds of activities don't belong into teaching grammar communicatively. Communicative language teaching highlights the importance of spontaneous communication outside the classroom and reinforces the idea of making lessons as creative and engaging as possible. And adding repetition elements is sometimes associated with boredom. So, how can we balance both? Scott Thornbury suggests modifying the task we ask the students to repeat. We can either change the amount of scaffolding or visual support we provide to the students, like having less and less text so that they could practice a dialogue independently, or we can change the main skill we practice, for example, from speaking to writing. Reducing the time allocated for the task in pairs or asking students to do the same task in a new small group provides the variety and spontaneity we seek in teaching communicatively. This is what it looks like in practice. Repeat in the manner of the word. Ask students to repeat the sentence with the target grammar item softly, loudly, sadly, or happily. Disappearing dialogue. Write a dialogue on the board and give students some time to practice it. After the students are comfortable with the dialogue, omit a word or a phrase and ask students to perform it. This time they have less of a written record and are required to remember the dialogue. Repeat the above stage until all the dialogue has gone. Running dictation. Type or write a short text on a piece of paper and paste it on the wall. Ask students to work in groups. Each group sends their representatives to the front of the class to read the text line by line. The representative then dictates the line back to their group. The representative travels back and forth, reading and dictating until their group finishes. The group that finishes first is the winner. Jazz chants. One more way to work with the target grammar is to create jazz chants. They work for English as a rhythmical language and help to focus on accuracy in a fun way. Accompanied with clapping and/or stomping, chanting does not need any equipment and can boost energy and bring laughter into a serious grammar class. Dictogloss. The teacher reads a short text written to illustrate a particular language item once or twice at a normal speed. Students listen carefully and try to understand what they hear. While listening, they can write down some key words. After listening, they work individually or in pairs and try to reconstruct the text as accurately as possible. Finally, students compare their text with the original. They see the differences and similarities. Here are some examples of guided practice activities. Story chains. The students sit in a circle. The first student says, "My name is Joan, and in my free time I play the piano." The next student has to say, "Her name is Joan, and in her free time she plays the piano. My name is George, and in my free time I read books." The third student has to say, "Her name is Joan, and she plays the piano. His name is George, and he reads books. My name is Peter, and so on. This activity can be used to practice different grammar structures. For example, the first student could say, "My name is Peter, and I have never traveled by plane." Two truths and a lie. Tell the students to write down 3 sentences about themselves, 2 true sentences and 1 that is a lie. Each of the sentences should contain the target grammar structure. For example, I have or haven't done this, I'd like to, I wouldn't like to, and so on. One student reads her or his sentences aloud. The others try to guess which statements are true and which one is a lie. Guessing games. The students have to find out what a mystery object is or who a mystery person is by asking 20 yes or no questions. Young learners can be asked to work on their own and prepare a description of an animal. Other students have to ask questions using the target structure. For example, does it have wings or can it fly, in order to guess what animal the person described. Quizzes. The students have to write general knowledge questions about history. For example, when did World War II begin, to practice the past simple tense, or geography. For example, what is the name of the longest river in the world or in our country, to practice the superlatives. After they have prepared the questions, the students are divided into teams and ask each other the prepared questions. Free practice activities usually include some kind of an information gap activity, which is created when 2 or more students have different bits of information. They have to share these pieces if they want to understand the whole thing. They have to talk to each other to close the information gap. We can make information gap activities closed. The students can only use specific language items, or open, they can use a range of language items. Other free practice activities include role plays, simulation, debates, discussions, composing and telling stories, and so on. While planning for grammar practice, the teacher should include practice activities which are meaningful, engaging, focused, and designed in such a way that they address the learning challenge, form, meaning, or use, that is, the part of a grammar structure which causes difficulties for students. If the students struggle with form, meaningful repetition is useful. For example, grammar just chance or find someone who, or 20 questions game. If they have a problem with understanding meaning, they will need to practice linking form and meaning together using, for example, the "what have I changed" game. If the issue is use of a structure, students will need to make a choice. For example, role play a job interview, requiring them to use the present perfect to talk about their experiences, or the past simple tense to specify when they acquired these experiences. In the planning process, teachers should also consider how to order grammar practice activities. There is no absolute rule, but activities should generally be logically linked, with controlled practice coming before freer practice. Over time, as students progress, each type of activity allows increased amounts of creativity, personal relevance, and experimentation with the language. Practice will surely help students, but they won't be able to get everything perfect at once. Remember the organic garden. Their performance may improve, then become worse, then improve again, following a U-shaped curve. Example of a practice activity sequence. The present perfect versus the past simple tense, where the learning challenge is meaning and use. The students need help with restructuring to realize the differences between the 2 tenses. Of course, accuracy and fluency are important as well, but they do not pose such a challenge, and through the following practice activities, they will also be included in practice, especially through teacher feedback at the end of an activity. Practice activities included are closed information gap, disappearing dialogue, 2 truths and a lie, and story chain. Closed information gap. Students are given a dialogue with both the present perfect and the past simple forms on a certain topic. They have to go through all the sentences individually to fill in the missing forms of the verbs in brackets. After completing the dialogue and checking with the whole class, students are asked to explain why they used present perfect and the past simple in which sentence and what helped them recognize and realize which goes where. Disappearing dialogue. The students are then divided into pairs and are given some time to practice the dialogue. They are then shown the dialogue on the projection screen with several of the forms missing and have to remember how it goes. They perform it until all the forms are missing. Two truths and a lie. Students are asked to come up with 3 sentences about themselves. 1 incorrect and 2 correct ones using the tenses in question. For example, I'm Anna and I have never flown on a plane. I have always liked getting up early in the morning. I got up at 7 a.m. yesterday. After they have all written down their sentences, they each take turn to read them to the rest of the class, who have to try to guess which are true and which aren't. Story chain. Students are in a circle, thinking about the lies they said about themselves in the previous activity. The first student has to change the lie to be true and say it aloud. For example, I'm Anna and I have never liked getting up early in the morning. The next student has to repeat what was said and change his or her lie as well, and so on. For example, her name is Anna and she has never liked getting up early in the morning. My name is Leo and I have always been afraid of spiders. These activities are engaging because they require active participation, interaction, and reflection on the learning challenge, as well as personalization on the student's part. They are meaningful because they combine fluency and restructuring with accuracy in a communicative way. To conclude, teachers should always provide students with frequent practice focused on both understanding and producing the newly learned forms. Practice activities should be meaningful and engaging, meaning that students should actively use the target structure to engage in communication and/or express their views. Practice activities are meant to help the students overcome learning difficulties.